Boys and girls, this book is called Cinderella. Favorite fairy tales. Cinderella. Once upon a time, in a great kingdom, a gentleman lived happily with his wife, who was sweet and good, and his pretty little daughter. But alas, one day, the gentleman's wife fell ill and died. A few years passed, and the gentleman married again, a lady who was cruel, wicked, and proud. She had 2 daughters who were as cruel, wicked, and proud as herself. As soon as she saw her, this wicked woman hated her husband's daughter because the girl's goodness and kindness showed up the stupidity, pride, and laziness of her own 2. The day after her wedding, the stepmother ordered the poor child to do all of the hard work of the household. She had her scour the pots, wash the dishes, and clean the floors, and she scrubbed and polished her stepmother's and her stepsister's rooms. She slept at the top of the house in a dusty old attic. To reach it, she had to climb up a narrow, ill-lit staircase. When she had finished her work, the poor child used to sit in the chimney corner along the cinders where it was warm. That was why they called her Cinderella. She enraged her stepsisters even more because even in rags with her untidy hair, she was 1,000 times more beautiful than these vain creatures who spent their days looking in the mirror and arranging their hair. Cinderella was very unhappy, but she was so brave that she never complained. One day, a messenger from the king announced that the prince was going to hold a grand ball, to which all the young ladies and of the kingdom were invited. During the weeks beforehand, Cinderella's stepsisters spent all of their time preparing their ball gowns, which gave the poor child even more work, as she was constantly sewing and unpicking, ironing, shortening, and lengthening their skirts and bodices. "I," said the eldest stepsister, "will wear my red velvet dress with a silver collar." "I," said the other, "will wear my gold-embroidered cloak and diamond tiara." The 2 girls forced Cinderella to be present whenever they tried on their clothes, as they knew she had very good taste. "Would you like to go to the ball, Cinderella?" asked the younger stepsister. "Oh, I beg you, don't make fun of me. Look at my hair and my ragged clothes." "Cinderella is right," said the elder sister. "She would look ridiculous and put us to shame." And almost anybody would have tried to get her own back for such an insult. But Cinderella, who was not vengeful, took even more trouble to prepare their clothes. At last, the evening itself arrived, and the 2 sisters left for the ball, dressed in lavishly embroidered gowns, glittering with jewels. From the window of her miserable attic, Cinderella watched them go for as long as she could, and then, when the carriage was out of sight, she burst into tears. From her far-off country, Cinderella's fairy godmother heard her goddaughter crying. With a wave of her magic wand, she arrived in the dusty attic. "What is the matter, my gentle goddaughter?" she asked. "Oh, godmother, I would so love to go to the ball," Cinderella replied in tears. "Well, you shall go to the ball, and you will be the most beautiful woman there. Go into the garden and fetch a pumpkin." Although she was very surprised to be asked to do this, Cinderella went out and cut a big pumpkin. And with a wave of her magic wand, the fairy turned it into a magnificent golden coach. "Now, my pretty child, I need a rat and some mice." Cinderella brought a rat and 6 little mice from the mousetrap. With another wave of her magic wand, the fairy turned the mice into 6 fine, dapple gray horses and the big rat into an elegant coachman. Go back out into the garden once more. Behind the water can you will find 6 brightly colored lizards. Bring them to me, said the fairy. And when Cinderella came back, her fairy godmother turned the reptiles into smart footmen. Now you are ready to go to the ball, said the fairy, admiring the carriage proudly. I don't want to abuse your kindness, dear godmother, but dressed as I am, I look like a beggar. Oh dear, what am I thinking of? Cried the good fairy, and she waved her wand again and again until she had turned Cinderella into the most ravishing princess. Her old skirt full of holes became a sparkling gold silk robe. Her hair went elegantly styled with curls and intertwined braids. Then the fairy gave Cinderella a pair of glass slippers that fitted the shape of her pretty little feet perfectly. But her fairy godmother had a word of warning for her. Take care, Cinderella. There is one thing you must not forget. Before the 12th stroke of midnight, you must have come home from the ball. Otherwise, your coach will turn back into a pumpkin, your horse back into mice, your coachman back into a rat, and your footman back into lizards, and your magnificent clothes back into rags. With a grateful heart, the lovely Cinderella promised that she would obey her godmother and be home by the time the clock struck midnight. Then she stepped gracefully into her carriage, which rolled off into the night, toward the palace and the prince's ball. When Cinderella entered the ballroom, there was a sudden silence. The violins stopped playing, conversation ceased, and dumbstruck with admiration, everyone gazed and dazzled beauty of this unknown lady. The prince himself begged her to sit in the place of honor, but then he found himself unable to utter a single word because he was so enchanted by her. However, eventually he invited her to dance, and Cinderella did so with such grace that everyone admired her even more. Then very politely, she went to greet her sisters, who did not recognize her. Time seemed to fly until Cinderella heard the palace clock strike 11. Immediately she made a graceful curtsy and left the ballroom as fast as she could. As soon as she reached home, she called upon her fairy godmother. How can I thank you, dear godmother? I have just had the happiest time of my life. But I have one more thing to ask you. The prince invited me to a second ball, which is to be held tomorrow night. The good fairy was about to answer when Cinderella's 2 stepsisters knocked on the front door. Cinderella went to open it for them, rubbing her eyes as if she had just woken up. How late you are, sisters, she said, stretching and yawning. We had a wonderful time, said the young stepsister. An unknown princess came who was very pleasant to us. She obviously noticed at once that we are the sort of people to be seen with. Nobody knows her name, continued the elder. We heard that the prince would give everything he possesses to know who she is. Cinderella smiled and said, Please, sister, lend me your old yellow dress so tomorrow I can go to the ball to see this beautiful princess. What? You at the ball? Are you mad? Cried one. You'd look completely ridiculous. You would make us ashamed, said the other. And sniggering together, the nasty pair went off to bed. The next evening, Cinderella's fairy godmother waved her magic wand and produced more miracles. She turned a pumpkin into a carriage, mice into horses, a rat into a coachman, lizards into footmen, and she spent even more time than the previous evening in producing Cinderella's gown. Tonight must be even more beautiful than you were last night, said the fairy. Instead of curls and braids, you will wear your hair loose. Your dress will be made entirely of lace. As for your shoes, you can wear the same pretty glass slippers as before. And so Cinderella left for the ball, dressed like a queen. On the palace steps, the prince stood waiting impatiently. When he saw Cinderella arriving, he thought he must be dreaming. She was even more beautiful than he remembered. And gently, he took her hand in his, and they began dancing, twirling, and spinning. Gazing constantly into each other's eyes, Cinderella enjoyed herself so much that she did not hear the clock strike 11, or even 11:30. But on the last stroke of midnight, she tore herself out of the prince's arms in panic and ran like a startled deer. She ran as fast as she could, dashing at full speed down the great palace staircase, and in her haste, she lost one of her glass slippers. And before she disappeared into the night, as she tried to catch up with her, the prince found the slipper on one of the stairs, and gently he picked it up, touched it to his lips, and then ordered his guards to set out in search of the beautiful unknown princess. But she had vanished completely. Cinderella arrived home, out of breath, with no coach, no coachman, no horses, and no footmen, and wearing her old worn clothes. And she had left off the magnificent evening with one small glass slipper. When the stepsisters came home from the ball, Cinderella pretended that she had just woken up and asked them if they had seen the beautiful princess again. "She did come," said the elder sister, "but she ran away without even saying goodbye when the clock struck midnight. She ran off so fast," continued the younger, that she lost one of her glass slippers. The prince picked it up and refused to dance or even speak to the rest of the evening. He just gazed at the slipper in his hand. "He's madly in love with her," continued the eldest, "and in my opinion, he will do everything he can to find her." Indeed, the very next morning, a messenger from the king declared that the prince would marry the girl whose foot fit perfectly into this glass slipper. First, they tried the shoe on princesses, then duchesses, then all of the ladies in the kingdom, but none of them had a delicate enough foot. At last, the slipper was brought to the two stepsisters, who also tried in vain to squeeze their feet into it. "Now it's your turn," said the king's messenger, turning towards Cinderella. "You are joking!" cried the two sisters, laughing unkindly. "Cinderella is just a kitchen maid." "I have my orders to try the shoe on all the women in the kingdom," replied the messenger, and he knelt in front of Cinderella and offered the slipper to her. The girl slipped her foot into it, and of course, the shoe fitted perfectly. Then Cinderella took the other glass slipper out of her apron pocket and showed it to her stepsisters, who were astounded. Then the fairy godmother arrived, and with a wave of her magic wand, she turned Cinderella's rags into a dress that was even more beautiful than the previous ones. The two cruel sisters recognized the beautiful princess they had seen at the ball, and they fell on their knees and begged for forgiveness. Cinderella hugged them and said she forgave them with all of her heart. Then Cinderella was taken to the palace, where the prince immediately recognized his fair unknown princess. He found her more beautiful than ever, clasped in her arms, and swore to love her forever. He married her, and they had many children. Cinderella, who was as good as she was beautiful, brought her stepsisters to live at the palace too, and within a year, she married them to two of the lords at court. Favorite fairy tales: Cinderella. I hope you loved it.